The people of Stonewater thought Julian Vey had made the saddest mistake of his life when the mountain coach delivered his new wife. She was so large that two men quietly moved closer when she stepped down, afraid the wooden step might give beneath her weight, and one woman covered a laugh behind her glove when Beatrice stopped halfway to the ground to catch her breath. By supper, half the settlement was already calling her the enormous bride of Vey Mountain. By winter, those same people would climb through waist-deep snow and pound desperately on her door, begging the woman they had mocked to save their children, their husbands, and eventually, the truth they had spent years helping to bury. Beatrice heard the laughter before she saw the faces. It came softly from somewhere behind the coach station, mixed with the clink of harness buckles and the tired breathing of horses. She had spent 3 days traveling west through freezing rain, mud, and mountain roads, and her entire body hurt. Her back ached from the narrow coach seat. Her ankles were swollen inside her boots. The heavy brown traveling dress she had chosen because it was plain enough not to draw attention now felt like a cruel joke, because attention had found her anyway. She stood on the iron step of the coach, with one hand gripping the doorframe. The ground looked farther away than it probably was. A young man near the stable leaned toward his friend. "Think Vey ordered a wife or a winter feed supply?" The other man laughed. Beatrice closed her eyes for half a second. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles, crossed rivers, slept in unfamiliar rooms, and endured more staring than she could count. She had promised herself that when she arrived, she would not cry. Not here, not in front of strangers, especially not because of one stupid sentence. Then another voice joined them. Julian better reinforce that porch. That one brought louder laughter. Beatrice stepped down. Her boot slipped in the mud. A large hand caught her elbow before she fell. "Easy." The voice was low and calm. Beatrice looked up. Julian Vey stood beside the coach. He was taller than she had expected from the photograph he had mailed months earlier, with weathered features, dark blonde hair touched with grey at the temples, and the kind of broad shoulders that came from years of lifting feed sacks, fence posts, and injured cattle. His coat was worn but clean. His eyes were grey and serious. He did not stare at her stomach. He did not glance at the men laughing behind the stable. He looked directly at her face. "You, Beatrice?" She swallowed. "Yes, I'm Julian. I assumed." Something flickered in his expression. It might have been amusement. The grip around her elbow loosened, though he kept his hand near in case she slipped again. Behind him sat a large wagon with 2 thick-bodied draft horses. Beatrice noticed the wagon immediately. It had a low step, much lower than the coach. Julian followed her eyes. "I thought the usual ranch cart might be difficult after a long trip," he said. The sentence was simple, matter of fact. There was no pity in it. That somehow made it harder. Beatrice looked away because her eyes suddenly burned. "You didn't have to do that!" "I know." He reached for her trunk. The driver climbed down to help and whispered, not quietly enough, "You'll want both of us for that." Julian looked at him. "The trunk or the woman?" The driver blinked. Beatrice froze. Julian's expression did not change. The driver coughed. "The trunk. Then take the other end." They carried it to the wagon. Beatrice watched Julian place it carefully beneath a canvas cover. Inside that trunk, beneath folded dresses and winter shawls, lay the life she had crossed the country to escape. A polished leather medical bag, 2 surgical cases, a stethoscope, a small collection of glass bottles wrapped separately in linen, needles, forceps, scissors, bandages, medical texts, and a certificate bearing the name Beatrice Eleanor Lorne. She had almost burned the certificate before leaving Philadelphia. Instead, she had folded it, tied it with blue ribbon, and buried it beneath her clothes. Julian held out his hand. "Ready?" Beatrice glanced at the wagon. The low step was still difficult. She hated that he could see that. She hated that everybody could. Her entire life seemed to have been measured in things other people could watch her struggle to do. Stairs, narrow chairs, carriages, long hallways, buttons, crowded rooms. She placed one large hand in Julian's. His grip tightened. She raised one foot. For a moment, she thought she would not make it. Then Julian quietly shifted closer, offered his forearm, and allowed her to use his strength without announcing that she needed it. When she finally sat on the wagon bench, breathing harder than she wanted, she waited for embarrassment. It did not come from Julian. He climbed beside her and gathered the reins. "Mountain road takes about 3 hours," he said. "Longer if the North Trail is icy." Beatrice looked at the settlement around them. Stonewater was smaller than she had imagined. A general store, a church, a blacksmith, a boarding house, a narrow building marked Dr. Hollis Ward, several homes, a saloon with a green-painted door. People stood on porches pretending not to stare. Near the general store, a thin woman in a fine blue coat whispered something to another woman. Both looked toward Beatrice. Both smiled. Beatrice knew that smile. She had known it since childhood. It was the smile people wore when they wanted cruelty to look like politeness. Julian clicked his tongue. The horses started forward. The woman in blue called, "Mr. Vey." Julian turned. She lifted one gloved hand. "We didn't realize your advertisement had been so successful." A few people laughed. Julian stared at her. "Neither did I, Mrs. Pike." The woman's smile weakened. Julian turned back to the road. Beatrice watched the settlement disappear behind them. For several minutes neither spoke. The road climbed steadily through dark pine woods. Snow rested beneath the trees in shadowed patches. Above them, mountains rose in white layers against a pale sky. Beatrice kept her hands folded tightly in her lap. Finally, Julian said, "Martha Pike talks because silence frightens her." Beatrice almost laughed. Instead, she said, "You don't have to defend me. I wasn't." She looked at him. He kept his eyes on the road. "I was explaining Martha Pike." That time Beatrice did laugh. It surprised her. The sound felt unfamiliar. Julian glanced over. "So you can laugh. I never said I couldn't. Your letters were serious. So were yours. I'm a cattleman. Serious is cheaper than ink." Beatrice smiled despite herself. Then she remembered why she had come. Her smile faded. Julian had written honestly. His wife had died nearly 6 years earlier. He had no children. He owned a remote cattle property on Vey Mountain and needed someone who could help with accounts, ordering, preserving food, correspondence, payroll, and the 1,000 invisible tasks required to keep an isolated ranch functioning. He did not promise romance. He did not describe himself as lonely. But loneliness had sat quietly between almost every line. Beatrice had recognized it because she carried the same thing. Her own letters had been truthful in careful ways. She told him she was 35. She told him she was unusually large. She told him she tired on steep ground but could work long hours at a desk or table. She told him she had managed records for a large Eastern institution. She told him she was educated. She told him she had left after a professional disagreement. She did not tell him that the institution had been St. Agnes Hospital. She did not tell him she had trained under physicians who once praised her judgment. She did not tell him she had assisted during difficult births, fevers, industrial injuries, broken bones, infections, and nights when the corridors smelled of blood and disinfectant. She did not tell him that 3 months before answering his advertisement, a young factory worker named Clara Bell had been brought into St. Agnes with a fever and severe abdominal pain. Beatrice had warned Dr. Samuel Reddick that Clara's condition was worsening. He dismissed her. When Beatrice insisted, he laughed in front of 2 interns. "You are a nurse, Miss Lorne, not a physician." "I know what I am." "Then behave accordingly." She had appealed to the hospital administrator. By the time anyone acted, Clara was dying. Afterward, the institution needed an explanation. Dr. Reddick had powerful friends. Beatrice had none. A statement appeared claiming she had failed to report changes in the patient's condition promptly. It was a lie. A clean, respectable, carefully written lie. At the hearing, 3 colleagues who knew the truth stared at their hands. Afterward, the superintendent asked Beatrice to resign quietly. She refused. He looked at her body before looking back at her face. "You are not suited to public confidence, Miss Lorne." She had stared at him. "What does that mean?" His mouth tightened. "You struggle to climb the stairs between wards. Patients notice. Families notice. A woman in your condition should understand when she has become a burden to an institution." That evening, Beatrice had walked home through freezing rain. She had locked her apartment door. Then she sat on the floor because she did not have the strength to reach the chair. She cried until dawn. 3 weeks later, she saw Julian Vey's matrimonial notice. Widowed cattleman. 43. Remote property. Seeking educated woman of practical temperament. Honesty valued above beauty. Comfortable home. Hard winters. No promise of easy life. Honesty valued above beauty. The sentence had hurt enough to make her answer. Now, sitting beside him on the mountain road, Beatrice wondered whether she had begun their marriage with a lie. Julian pointed through the trees. "That's Vey Mountain." She looked. It rose enormous against the sky. A wide shoulder of dark timber covered the lower slopes. Higher up, stone cliffs cut through the snow. "How far?" "House is another hour." Beatrice stared at the incline. Julian noticed. "Road reaches the house." "I'm glad. I figured you might be. There was no cruelty in it." Still, she stiffened. Julian glanced at her. "If I say something wrong, tell me." "You haven't. You looked like you wanted to throw me off the wagon. I was considering it." "That's better." She frowned. "What is?" "You telling me." He guided the horses around a bend. "I don't know what people have said to you before, but I'd rather know when I've stepped wrong than spend 6 months guessing why my wife hates me." The word wife settled strangely between them. They had been married by a traveling minister at the settlement church less than an hour after she arrived. No flowers, no music, 2 witnesses. A ring Julian had carried in his coat pocket. Beatrice had expected the moment to feel larger. Instead, it felt frighteningly quiet. Now she looked at the plain gold band on her finger.
"Do you regret it?"
she asked. Julian's hands tightened slightly on the reins.
"We've been married 3 hours."
"That isn't an answer." "No." He looked at her. "I don't regret it." She studied his face. "You looked surprised when I stepped off the coach." "I was. I described myself. You said you were large." "I am large." "Yes." "Exceptionally large." "Yes." Beatrice waited. Julian waited too. She almost became angry. "And what? You have nothing else to say? I'm trying to understand what answer you want." She looked away. The mountains rolled endlessly beyond the trees. Finally, she said, "Most men would. Most men aren't married to you." The answer was so uncomplicated that she had nowhere to place her fear. An hour later, the ranch appeared. The house stood in a sheltered valley beneath the mountain, built from pale timber and dark stone. A broad porch wrapped around the front. Beyond it were barns, corrals, storage sheds, and long fenced pastures fading beneath snow. Beatrice forgot her exhaustion. "It's beautiful." Julian looked almost embarrassed. "Needs paint. Everything needs something." He glanced at her. "That sounds like experience talking." "It is." A man emerged from the barn. He was young, red-haired, and grinning until he saw Beatrice. His grin vanished, then returned in a different form. "Well, Mr. Vey," he said slowly, "you certainly brought home enough wife for the whole mountain." The words landed with perfect clarity. Beatrice stopped breathing. Julian climbed down from the wagon. The young man seemed to realize too late that something was wrong. Julian walked toward him. He did not shout. "That was worse. Tom." "Yes, sir?" "You'll apologize." Tom's face reddened. "I was only joking." "I know." Julian stopped in front of him. "That's why you'll apologize." Tom looked past him at Beatrice. His embarrassment turned defensive. "Ma'am, I didn't mean—" "Look at her when you say it." Tom did. Beatrice wanted to disappear. She hated Julian for making the moment larger. She hated Tom for creating it. She hated herself most of all for feeling tears gather. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Vey." She nodded once. Julian turned away. "Get her trunk." Tom hurried toward the wagon. Beatrice climbed down slowly. Julian came to help. She refused his hand. "I can do it." He lowered his hand. "All right." She made it to the ground. The house had 3 porch steps. They were high. Beatrice stared at them. Julian saw. He said nothing. She climbed the first, then the second. By the third, her knees shook. She reached the porch and tried to hide how hard she was breathing. Inside, the house was warm. The main room had a stone fireplace, deep chairs, shelves of books, and wide windows facing the valley. The kitchen was larger than the one in her old apartment. A long table stood beneath hanging copper pots. Beatrice walked slowly through it. "This is yours now, too," Julian said. She touched the edge of the table. The sentence frightened her more than the mountain. That evening, she prepared supper because she needed something familiar to do. Julian protested once. "You traveled 3 days. I'm not helpless." "I didn't say you were. You were thinking it." "No, you were. I was thinking you looked tired." She turned sharply. He leaned against the kitchen doorway. "You're allowed to be tired, Beatrice." The anger went out of her. That was going to be the problem with him. He kept refusing to behave like the men she understood. Over the next several weeks, Julian began changing small things around the ranch. He never announced the changes. One morning, a sturdy wooden rail appeared beside the porch steps. A few days later, Tom and another worker replaced the tall kitchen stool with a broad-backed chair. The wagon step became wider. A bench appeared halfway between the house and barn. Beatrice confronted Julian after finding it. "You built a resting bench." "Yes, because of me." "Yes." Her cheeks burned. "I don't need the ranch rebuilt around my weakness." Julian set down the harness he was repairing. "Is the bench useful?" "That isn't the point. Do you use it?" She hesitated. "Yes." "Then I don't understand the problem. The problem is that everyone sees it. Everyone sees the water trough too. That is not the same." "No, cattle can't sit on the bench." She glared at him. Julian's mouth moved slightly. "Are you laughing at me?" "A little." She turned away. He became serious. "Beatrice." She stopped. "I'm not changing you." His voice softened. "I'm changing wood." She looked back. "The mountain doesn't care about pride. If something can be made easier without making it worse, I make it easier." She swallowed. "You don't think I'm lazy?" "No. You barely know me. I know you've reorganized the ranch accounts, found 2 suppliers overcharging us, repaired my filing system, and somehow convinced Tom to wash before supper." A reluctant smile touched her mouth. "That last part was difficult. I know." By December, the house no longer felt like Julian's. It felt shared. Beatrice managed payroll and supply orders. She taught herself the ranch ledgers in less than a week. She learned which workers had families, which cattle buyer lied about weights, which merchant in Stonewater charged extra because he believed mountain ranchers could not compare prices. Julian learned that Beatrice liked tea too strong and hated silence during breakfast. He learned she read novels when she could not sleep. She learned he talked to horses when he thought no one was listening. Some nights they sat near the fire for hours. Their marriage remained careful. They shared a bedroom, but not always the bed. Neither pushed, neither knew how. Then, one evening, Julian came in carrying a letter. He placed it on the table. From Philadelphia. Beatrice froze. The handwriting belonged to Margaret Vale, one of the nurses who had remained silent during the hearing. Beatrice stared at the envelope. Julian noticed. "You don't have to open it." She picked it up. "I do." The letter was short. Dr. Reddick had been promoted. St. Agnes had publicly repeated its version of Clara Bell's death. Someone had asked about Beatrice. Margaret did not know who. At the bottom she had written, "I am sorry I did not speak." Beatrice folded the letter. Julian watched her. "Bad?" "Yes." "Want to tell me?" "No." His face tightened. "All right." That should have ended it. Instead, Beatrice heard herself say, "Do you ever wonder what I did before I came here?" "Of course." "And you don't ask? You said you wanted to leave it behind. What if I did something terrible?" Julian leaned back. "Did you?" She looked at him. "No. Then I suppose I'll wait until you're ready. Her throat tightened. She nearly told him. Instead, she said, "You shouldn't trust people so easily." Julian's expression changed. "I don't. You trust me." "Yes. Why?" He looked toward the fire. "Because I decided to." That answer stayed with her. 2 weeks later, the ranch hand Caleb Monroe fell from a hayloft. Beatrice heard the shout from the kitchen. By the time she reached the barn, Julian was kneeling beside Caleb. The young man's face was gray. His breathing came in short, broken gasps. Blood darkened his shirt beneath the ribs. Tom stood nearby, trembling. "We need Ward," Julian said. "Take the fastest horse." Beatrice was already kneeling. Her hands moved before fear could stop them. "Don't move him." Julian looked at her. "What? Don't move him." She touched Caleb's neck. Pulse fast. Too fast. She examined the wound, then his pupils, then his abdomen. Her old training returned with terrifying ease. "Caleb, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered. "Yes." "Good. Stay awake." Julian stared. "Beatrice?" She ignored him. "Tom, clean blankets. Now." "Julian, boil water." Nobody moved. Beatrice looked up. "Now." They moved. She ran to the house. Upstairs, she pulled the trunk from beneath the bed. Her hands shook as she opened it. Folded dresses, blue ribbon, leather case. The smell of old antiseptic seemed to fill the room. For 1 second, she was back at St. Agnes. White corridors. Clara Bell crying. Dr. Reddick saying, "You are not a physician." Beatrice opened the medical bag. Then she returned to the barn. Julian saw the instruments. His face changed completely. But Caleb groaned, and there was no time. "What are you?" Julian asked. Later, she worked. Not perfectly, not magically, but competently. She controlled the bleeding, stabilized Caleb as best she could, kept him conscious, and recognized signs that moving him down the mountain immediately could make everything worse. Dr. Hollis Ward arrived nearly 3 hours later. He was a neat man in his late 50s with silver hair and narrow eyes. The moment he saw Beatrice beside Caleb, those eyes sharpened. "What have you done?" "Kept him alive." Ward knelt. He examined Caleb. Slowly, his expression changed. He understood. He did not praise her. Instead, he looked at the instruments. "Where did you get those?" "They're mine." "You're trained?" "Yes." "In what?" Beatrice met his gaze. "Clinical nursing, surgical assistance, obstetric care, emergency treatment." The barn became quiet. Julian stood behind her. Ward's eyes traveled over her body. "You?" The single word contained everything. Beatrice felt it. So did Julian. He stepped forward. Ward quickly looked back at Caleb. "We should move him inside." Together they did. Caleb survived. By morning, everyone on Vey Mountain knew why. By the following afternoon, Stonewater knew. 3 days later, an old woman arrived with an infected hand. Beatrice treated it. The next morning, a mother brought a feverish child. Then a rancher came with a deep cut. Then a miner with a damaged shoulder. Some of them had laughed when Beatrice arrived. They entered the house now with lowered eyes. Beatrice helped them anyway. Julian watched. One night, after the last patient left, he stood in the kitchen doorway. "You told me you managed records." "I did." "You told me your work ended after a professional disagreement." "It did." "You didn't tell me you spent years in a hospital." Beatrice kept washing instruments. "No." "Why?" "I didn't want to be that woman anymore." "That isn't an answer. It is the only one I have." Julian stepped closer. "You talked about honesty in every letter." She turned. "I never lied. You let me believe something that wasn't true. I told you what I could. You trusted strangers with your life before you trusted your husband with your name." The words struck harder than she expected. "You don't know what happened. Because you won't tell me." His anger was quiet. That made it worse. Beatrice gripped the edge of the sink. At St. Agnes, a patient died. Julian's expression changed. "I tried to prevent it." She told him everything. Clara, Reddick, the warnings, the hearing, the silence, the superintendent, the stares, the comment about her body. When she finished, Julian stood motionless. Why didn't you fight? I did. No. After. She laughed bitterly. With what? Respectability? Money? A handsome face? Men listened to Dr. Reddick before I opened my mouth. You could have told me. I had known you through 6 letters. You married me. Yes. And still thought I'd look at you the same way. Beatrice's voice broke. Everyone eventually does. Julian stared at her. Something hurt moved across his face. Then he nodded. I suppose that's the part I'm angry about. What? You decided who I was before I had the chance to prove you wrong. He walked out. For the first time since her arrival, Beatrice slept alone. The distance lasted several days. Not cruelty, not punishment. Something more painful, disappointment. Then one morning, Julian placed a cup of tea beside her. Too strong. Exactly how she liked it. She looked up. He said, I'm still angry. I know. I also don't want you freezing me out because I'm angry. Her mouth trembled. I don't know how to do this. Neither do I. That was how they began again. The trouble came quietly. Dr. Ward never directly ordered Beatrice to stop treating people. He did something smarter. He asked questions. At the store, he wondered aloud whether Eastern hospitals allowed disgraced nurses to practice independently. At church, he mentioned the dangers of unlicensed treatment. At supper with the Pike family, he said he had heard rumors that Beatrice's former patient had died under suspicious circumstances. He never accused. He suggested. Suggestions grew faster than facts. Soon people whispered that Beatrice had been expelled from an Eastern hospital. Someone claimed she had fled criminal charges. Another person said her weight made it impossible for her to react quickly during emergencies. A letter arrived at the ranch. Julian opened it first. Your wife killed a girl back east. He folded it before Beatrice could see. Another arrived 2 days later. Then another. Medical alcohol disappeared from a supply crate. Bandages ordered from Helena never arrived. A package of quinine was replaced with sawdust. Julian began writing down dates. Beatrice did not know. She was too busy treating people. Then 8-year-old Elsie Pike became ill. Her mother brought her to Beatrice in tears. The child had fever, pain, and difficulty breathing. Beatrice listened to her chest. You need to keep her warm, but not overheated. Give her small amounts of water often. I want to watch her tonight. Martha Pike nodded. Then Dr. Ward arrived. He stood in the doorway. This child belongs under a physician's care. Beatrice faced him. She is under care. Ward looked at Martha. You understand this woman was removed from an Eastern hospital after a death. That is not true. Then why did you run? Beatrice went still. Martha looked frightened. Doctor, I strongly advise you to bring Elsie home. Beatrice stepped forward. She needs observation. Ward smiled sadly. As you observed Clara Bell, the name emptied the room. Beatrice stared. She had never told him Clara's surname. Julian noticed. So did Beatrice. But Martha was already gathering Elsie. Please, Beatrice said. Martha would not meet her eyes. I'm sorry. She carried the child away. Elsie worsened overnight. By morning, Julian found Beatrice standing outside the Pike house. Martha was crying inside. Beatrice had arrived too late to change the course of the illness. The child survived, but barely, after days of fever and frightening weakness. Stonewater blamed Beatrice anyway, because blame was easier than admitting fear. Outside the general store, Beatrice heard 2 women talking. I heard she nearly crushed a patient trying to move him. That woman shouldn't be near sick people. Look at her. She can hardly cross the street without breathing like a bellows. They laughed. Beatrice stood behind the wall. Her grocery basket hung from one hand. Inside it were flour, coffee, and medicine she had purchased for a family that could not afford it. She slowly set the basket down. For the first time in months, she felt exactly like the woman who had sat on the floor of her Philadelphia apartment crying until morning. That evening, Julian found her sitting beside the cold stove. You didn't light the fire. I forgot. He crouched in front of her. What happened? Nothing. Beatrice. She looked at him. Do you know what is exhausting? What? Being brave enough that other people become comfortable hurting you. Julian said nothing. She laughed weakly. They come to me when they're afraid. Then the moment somebody gives them permission to despise me again, they do. Not all of them. Enough. Julian reached for her hand. She pulled away. I want to go home. His face tightened. This is home. No, this is where I live. The difference frightened him. Over the next week, Julian spent more time in Stonewater. He visited the post office, the store, the freight office. He compared handwriting. He spoke privately with Caleb Monroe. He searched old account books belonging to his first wife, Anna. Beatrice knew none of it. She only knew Julian was gone more often. One afternoon, she entered the back room of the general store and heard male voices through the wall. Julian! Tom! Caleb. Another rancher. She can't remain here if this keeps happening, someone said. Beatrice froze. Julian answered, but a wagon passed outside, drowning the first part of his sentence. Then she heard clearly, if they want her gone, I'll deal with it. Her heart stopped. The man said something else. Julian replied, I should have known this would happen. Beatrice walked away before she heard more. By the time Julian returned to the ranch that night, her trunk was open. The medical instruments lay wrapped inside. Her dresses were folded. Snow struck the windows. Julian entered the bedroom. What are you doing? Leaving. No, she laughed. You don't get to say no. There's a storm coming. I'll stay at the boarding house until the coach runs. Julian looked at the trunk, then at her. Why? You know why. I don't. I heard you. His face changed. At Mercer's store? Yes. Beatrice, you said I couldn't remain. No. You said if they wanted me gone, you would deal with it. Yes. Tears filled her eyes. I was a fool. Julian crossed the room. She stepped back. Don't. He stopped. You heard half a conversation. I heard enough. No. You heard the part your fear was waiting for. That silenced her. Julian reached into his coat. He placed several papers on the bed. Anonymous letters, receipts, old medical notes, a page from Anna Vey's journal. What is this? Proof. Beatrice looked at him. Julian's voice lowered. Ward knew Clara Bell's name because someone from St. Agnes has been writing to him. She stared. What? Samuel Reddick. Her knees weakened. She sat. Julian continued. Ward contacted him after Caleb's accident. Reddick told him enough truth mixed with lies to destroy you. Why? Because Ward was afraid. Of me? Not only you. Julian picked up Anna's journal. My wife died 6 years ago. I know. I told you it was fever. Yes, it wasn't. His voice changed. Beatrice saw grief beneath it. Anna became sick after a difficult pregnancy we lost early. Ward treated her. She worsened for days. Beatrice stopped breathing. He ignored signs of infection. Julian nodded. Anna wrote that another woman begged him to send for help. He refused. Beatrice looked at the journal. Why would the town hide that? Ward was their only doctor. People were afraid. Julian's mouth hardened, and because admitting what happened meant admitting they had trusted the wrong man. Beatrice understood instantly. The terrible comfort of shared silence. The same silence that had protected Reddick. Julian pointed to one anonymous letter. Ward made the mistake of using paper from his office. Same watermark. Caleb saw him collecting a parcel addressed to Reddick. Tom found 2 of your missing supply crates behind Ward's shed. Beatrice stared at him. You were investigating. Yes. The conversation. Julian's eyes met hers. They said you couldn't stay because the settlement would keep hurting you. I said, if they wanted you gone, I would deal with them. Then I said I should have known this would happen because I knew what this town did to Anna. Beatrice closed her eyes. Shame and relief collided painfully. I thought you were ashamed of me. I was ashamed. She opened her eyes. Of myself. Julian came closer. For letting you believe you were standing alone. Her face crumpled. I don't know how to stop expecting people to leave. Julian knelt. You don't have to stop tonight. He took her hand. But don't leave before giving me the chance to stay. Outside, the wind screamed across the mountain. Then a bell rang from the yard. Tom burst through the door. "Mr. Vey!" Julian stood. "What?" "Supply wagon overturned near Black Elk Pass." His face was white. Martha Pike's family was coming back from her sister's place. There were 6 people in the wagon. Maybe more. Snow gave way above the road. Avalanche? Part of the slope. Beatrice stood. Tom looked at her. "We need her." The words were simple. Everything stopped. Beatrice looked toward the trunk. The instruments she had been packing to hide again. Julian watched her. "You don't have to prove anything." She looked at him. "Yes," she whispered. "I do. Not to them." "No." She closed the trunk. "To myself." They left within 20 minutes. The storm made the world almost invisible. Snow struck Beatrice's face like sand. Julian had tied ropes along the sled so she could hold herself steady. The climb exhausted her quickly. Her lungs burned. Her legs shook. More than once she had to stop. No one laughed. No one told her to hurry. At Black Elk Pass, the wreckage appeared through blowing snow. The wagon lay on its side beneath broken pine branches. A horse was dead. Someone was screaming. Beatrice slid from the sled. Her boot sank almost to the knee. Julian grabbed her arm. "Slow! There isn't time!" "There's no time for you to fall either." He was right. She hated that he was right. They reached the wagon. Martha Pike was bleeding from the forehead. Her husband had a broken arm. 2 others were bruised. A young ranch hand named Daniel lay half beneath the wagon frame. His breathing was shallow. Beatrice worked. She examined one person, then another. She gave orders. People obeyed. For nearly an hour the storm disappeared from her mind. There were only decisions. Warmth, breathing, bleeding, pain. Who could move? Who could not? Then Daniel suddenly worsened. Beatrice made a choice too quickly. She ordered Tom to shift part of the wagon so they could pull him free. Daniel screamed. His breathing collapsed. Beatrice froze. She had made it worse. For one terrible second, she heard every voice from Philadelphia. Burden, failure, not suited to confidence. She backed away. "I made a mistake." Julian looked at her. Beatrice's hands shook. "I made it worse." "Then fix what you can." "I could kill him." "You could." She stared at Julian. He did not lie. He did not tell her everything would be fine. His face was pale with fear. "But he'll die here if nobody helps him." Beatrice closed her eyes. One breath, then another. She returned to Daniel. "All right." Her voice steadied. "We do this differently." She corrected the position, stabilized him, adjusted their plan. They freed him slowly. He survived. Hours later, as the rescued group reached Stonewater, people filled the street with lanterns. Beatrice could barely stand. Her dress was wet, her hair had fallen loose. Snow clung to her shoulders. Her face was red from cold. She looked nothing like the dignified medical woman she had once imagined she needed to become before anyone would respect her. She looked tired, large, human, alive. Martha Pike approached. Her face crumpled. "You saved us." Beatrice looked at her. "We all saved each other." Martha began crying. "I was cruel to you." Beatrice was too exhausted to comfort her. "Yes." Martha flinched. "I'm sorry." Beatrice nodded. "I believe you. Can you forgive me?" Beatrice looked toward the store where she had heard laughter weeks earlier, then toward the street where people now stood watching. "I don't know yet," Martha cried harder. Beatrice did not take the answer back. Forgiveness, she was beginning to understand, was not another service women were required to provide. Julian walked into the center of the street. Ward stood near his office. The doctor's face was gray. Julian held the letters in one hand. "Everyone needs to hear this." Ward turned. "Not tonight." "Yes." Julian's voice carried through the snow. "Tonight." People gathered. Julian read the evidence. The letters, the receipts, Anna's journal, the correspondence with Reddick. Ward denied it at first. Then he called Julian unstable. Then he called Beatrice dangerous. Finally he shouted, "You people needed me." Silence fell. Ward looked around wildly. You had no one else. I made mistakes because I was alone. You think she won't? Beatrice stepped forward. No. Ward stared. She continued. I will make mistakes. People shifted. I made one tonight. Julian looked at her. Beatrice did not hide. I moved too quickly during Daniel Mercer's rescue. I recognized the mistake. I corrected what I could. Ward laughed bitterly. And they trust you. They should not trust me because I never fail. Her voice remained calm. They should trust me because I will tell them when I do. The street became silent. Ward had no answer. That was the difference. Not perfection. Truth. Within a month, Ward left Stonewater. No dramatic arrest came. No cheering crowd chased him down the road. He simply lost the authority that secrecy had protected. People stopped entering his office. A regional medical board began reviewing the evidence connected to Anna's death. Letters were sent east concerning Dr. Reddick. Months later, Beatrice learned that St. Agnes had reopened Clara Bell's case. Margaret Vale finally testified. So did another nurse. The official record was corrected. Beatrice read the letter at the kitchen table. Julian stood beside the stove. Well? She looked up. They cleared my name, he smiled. Beatrice expected triumph. Instead, she began crying. Julian crossed the room. She pressed the paper against her chest. I thought this would feel bigger. What does it feel like? Late. Julian wrapped his arms around her. Yes. She cried against him. Too late for Clara. Yes. Too late for the years I hated myself. Julian held her tighter. Maybe. Beatrice looked up. What do you mean, maybe? Those years happened. His thumb brushed a tear from her cheek. But I don't think they get every year after them too. The following spring, Julian began building beside the ranch house. Beatrice watched workers raise a small timber building with wide doors, broad steps, reinforced floors, and large windows. She stood in the yard with her hands on her hips. What is it? Julian looked innocent. A shed. That is not a shed. Large shed. It has 6 windows. Fancy shed. Julian. He smiled. A clinic. Beatrice stared. No. Yes. You cannot build me a clinic without asking. I just did. You impossible man. You married me. She walked toward the building. The entrance had a gentle ramp beside the steps. She stopped. Julian became nervous. I thought on difficult days. Beatrice touched the railing. You thought correctly. Inside was an examination room, a desk, shelves, a treatment table, a small stove, a cabinet for supplies. Everything arranged so she could move without squeezing through narrow spaces. Beatrice turned slowly. You built this for me. Julian shook his head. No. She frowned. For the mountain. He looked at her. You just happen to be the one it needs. By summer, people came from 50 miles away. Some arrived ashamed. Some arrived afraid. Some still stared. Beatrice noticed. She always noticed. But the staring no longer decided the ending of the room. Years passed. The settlement grew. A railway eventually reached the valley. Stonewater became less isolated. Beatrice trained 2 younger women in patient care. She wrote letters to medical schools. She kept careful records. She refused to pretend she knew things she did not know. When cases were beyond her ability, she sent patients to larger hospitals. Her reputation grew because she never promised miracles. She promised attention. Julian aged beside her. His hair became silver. His knees hurt in winter. He still repaired anything that squeaked before Beatrice had time to complain. She still reorganized his accounts when he insisted his method made sense. Their marriage changed slowly. Not into a perfect romance, into something better, real partnership. They argued. They apologized. They disappointed each other. They learned each other again. One autumn evening, nearly 12 years after Beatrice first arrived, she stood outside the clinic. A new sign had been hung over the door. Beatrice Julian Vey Medical Care. The letters were large. Her name could be read from the road. She stared at it. Julian stood behind her. You hate it. No. Too large. She laughed. No. Crooked? A little. I knew it. She turned. I spent half my life trying to take up less space. Julian's expression softened. Beatrice looked back at the sign. My body, my voice, my opinions, even my name. The evening sun touched the mountains. She continued quietly. I thought if I became small enough, people might finally stop being angry that I existed. Julian stepped beside her. And did they? No, she smiled. So I stopped trying. A wagon appeared on the road. A young woman sat beside her husband. She held a sick child. Beatrice watched them approach. The woman climbed down. She looked frightened. Mrs. Vey? Yes. We were told you might help. Beatrice opened the clinic door. I'll try. Years earlier, that sentence would have terrified her. Try sounded too uncertain. She had thought worthy people needed to sound certain. Now she understood differently. There was courage in truth. The woman carried the child inside. Julian remained outside. Beatrice glanced back at him. You coming? Thought I'd stay out of your way. You never do. He smiled. She smiled too. Then she entered the clinic. Beatrice Vey never became thin. She never became graceful on steep mountain paths. She still needed the wagon step Julian had lowered years earlier. She still stopped on the bench between the barn and the house when her knees hurt. Some strangers still looked at her body before they looked into her eyes. Some people always would. The difference was that Beatrice no longer confused their first glance with a final judgment. She had crossed half a country, believing her life had ended, because respectable people decided she was too large, too inconvenient, too embarrassing, and too easy to blame. Instead, she found a mountain where the roads were difficult, the winters were cruel, the people were imperfect, and the truth sometimes took years to reach daylight. She found patients who disappointed her and returned asking forgiveness. She found enemies who were powerful only while others remained silent. She found that competence did not require perfection. She found that courage could include fear. She found that forgiveness could be offered slowly, selectively, and honestly. Most of all, she found a man who did not rescue her from herself. Julian never told Beatrice that her pain was imaginary. He never pretended the insults did not matter. He never demanded that she become fearless. He never asked her to become smaller so the world could feel more comfortable beside her. He simply kept making room. A wider wagon step, a railing, a resting bench, a clinic door broad enough for her shoulders. A place at the table, a place beside him. And when Beatrice finally understood what he had been doing all those years, she realized something that would have seemed impossible to the woman who once cried alone on a Philadelphia floor. Julian had never loved her, despite the space she occupied. He had simply loved her. The mountain people eventually stopped calling her the enormous bride of Vey Mountain. Children who had never known the old gossip called her Mrs. Vey. Ranchers called her Beatrice. Mothers called her when labor began. Fathers called her when fever frightened them. Old men argued with her about medicine, and then followed her instructions anyway. And high above Stonewater, when winter storms buried the roads, and lantern light glowed from the clinic windows, travelers could see one name through the snow: Beatrice Vey. The woman people had once laughed at from behind a coach station. The woman they had called too heavy to trust. The woman who had hidden her instruments because shame convinced her that talent could become dangerous when people disliked the body carrying it. The woman who finally stopped hiding. And beside the clinic, in the warm house below Vey Mountain, lived the cowboy who had understood before she did that love was never supposed to make a person smaller.